Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
Having been a programmer for a while and being one of those programmers that's also on social media, I've noticed some patterns, and I know you have too, Aaron. That's why we're talking about this today. But sometimes there can be a proclamation or some new course or something that happens that some programmers will hear and it sounds good to them, and they'll just kind of adopt it. And maybe it's because the person saying it is somebody that said good things before, right? So we're not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with the idea, but this idea of kind of jumping a little too fast to follow maybe a fad, if that's not too strong of a word, or some new way of doing something, or some new technique, or something like that, and just kind of like we're the grumpy old men, right? Like we come in and take not the opposite position, but sort of maybe the more stable and kind of tried and true position.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about that, you're talking about maybe something that was introduced by someone that maybe people look up to.
Sure.
Because they have a track record, or they're friendly, or they're nice on social media, or you met them in person. There's a lot of different reasons to like know a person or look up to them or whatnot.
Or they've been helpful to you before. I
Yeah,
mean, I think that's a valid reason too. Yeah.
absolutely. So you see that new example of something and they say this is the way to do it, and then you just kind of blindly copy it or implement it, or
Mm-hmm.
or maybe blindly is too strong of a word, but just without thinking of like, is this necessary for me?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this something that's worthwhile? Is this going to bring tangible business value in addition to making my life easier?
Right.
Because a lot of times we'll say, well, does this change, bring in more customers? And you're like, well, I can really kind of say, well, it made my programming experience better, so therefore I'm more efficient. And like, you can connect it if you really want to.
Yeah.
But I think if we look at both those two things together, is it going to bring in customers and make my experience better? That's probably more of a combination. Anyway, so is this something that should be applied to what I'm working on? And there's a term that I've used and I've heard for this sort of thing, which sounds a little strong at first, but I don't know if there's any other way to refer to it. It's this concept of hero worship.
Yeah.
So saying you have a person that you think has done a great job, and then everything they put out, you're like, yes, that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that can be a little dangerous. Or just this idea of like, I guess I don't want to be too controversial, but like there are some people that are popular,
Mm-hmm.
but they are good communicators or friendly or
Yeah.
personable, and
Mm-hmm.
their core message isn't strong, or it's wavering, it's changing. So as the grumpy old man, you kind of sit here and you watch, and you're like, okay, well, I've seen that happen 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, we already solved that problem. A decade ago, we tried that pattern.
Mm-hmm.
There's some good things. We kept those in the zeitgeist of, Laravel programming or whatever. And there are some things you shouldn't be doing. But you see this other person who, maybe hasn't been around for a long, that's perfectly fine, rediscovering something new on their own. And they bring it up, and then everyone says, oh, this is the way to do it because they like that person.
Yeah. Yeah. I've probably fallen into that trap a little bit myself too at times. Right. So I don't, it's not a judgment call against anybody that maybe you're listening to this like, are you talking about me? We're not. But if you kind of feel that way, that like, just, it's okay. Right. Like we've all done this to some degree, maybe not Aaron, but I probably have gotten excited about something and maybe jumped into it quicker than I should have. But now a little bit grayer Joel is looking back and like, yeah, maybe that's not the best approach, especially when working on like a work/business project like that. I think that's another delineation here is like, yeah, if you want to go play with something on a hobby project or a proof of concept or something, that's different than sort of just jumping in on some new way of doing something in like an actual production app that people rely upon.
You can kind of tell if you're not falling, but if you're kind of being influenced by this, if when you go to explain something, you start out telling or asking if the person knows or has heard of a person who shared the information.
Yeah.
So I like to say, like, let's talk about ideas and then give credit where it's due. The credit doesn't start the conversation.
Yeah.
So it's, if anyone ever said to you, like, oh, have you heard of Joel Claremont? And you're like,
nope.
Yeah. Oh, he wrote that book on validation. And that's how we learn to do validation. It's like, well, that's kind of okay. But really, I'd rather it be like, well, do you have a specific validation issue? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I found this book that maybe covers that. It's
Yeah.
written by Joe Claremont
Mhm.
and
Well,
Aaron Siri.
we can't forget that. I think a variation on that too, because I was actually thinking a different direction when you started saying that, which is
Okay.
when you're explaining the idea to somebody and maybe they push back or ask for clarification. And the only argument you can come up with is, well, Joel said this is the way
Mhm.
to do it. You know, they
Yeah.
call that appeal to authority as like one of the logical fallacies in an argument. And that can kind of show at a minimum, it shows that maybe you haven't fully understood the benefits of this approach. And you're only doing it because you respect or worship the person that proposed the idea. It doesn't mean the idea is bad. It just means you probably haven't figured it out fully whether or not it's good for you if you can't explain why it's good in your circumstance.
Yeah, when I was leading a team of developers, one of the things that the older, the developers that have been there for a little while longer would tell new developers that came in is like, well, Aaron has a reason.
Hmm.
So if you don't understand it, go ask him. Because a lot of times to save time, I'd say just do it this way and
Yeah.
then kind of go on to my next thing because I was managing a couple teams of developers. But I always tried to instill in them though, there is a reason behind this. I'm just not sharing it all the time because time constraints. But if you need to know that reason, or if this is the first time you ran into this and this is not a refresher for you, you need to stop me and make me make the time to talk about it and find out what this reason is. So I totally agree with you on that, that
Yeah.
there should be like the justification should be, this is a good idea.
Hmm.
And it was, but it was introduced to me by XYZ,
Yeah.
not, they say it's the way to do it.
Yeah, that's a secondary thing. And like you said, it's giving credit too. Like if you think this is a good idea and you explain why, like why not say who told it to you? I mean, that's kind of a nice thing to do
Yeah.
to pass on the credit for it.
Well, no, and the last thing too, I'll say about all of this is sometimes you run into this issue where then the conversation gets a little stuck, especially since I
Mhm.
don't go on social media a lot. And so if someone will say to me like, "Oh, well, have you heard of XYZ?" No, I don't. I don't really follow Twitter.
Aaron's
Like, I'll
over there reading his newspaper.
yeah, no, but I'll be like, yeah, I don't know who that is, and so then that kind of
Sure.
like makes
Yeah.
the conversation a little bit more, rough. So
Yeah.
like the person that's sharing the idea now feels like maybe they have to justify who that person is,
Yeah.
and like it's like no, they have a good idea, right? Let's talk about their
Mhm.
idea.
Yeah. I like that too. And one parting thought I had is
Oh, you're
this
trying to get the last
applies.
word, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's is this applies to us in this podcast too, right? Like I think we always
Yep.
try to couch our advice or experience in the idea that maybe this doesn't apply in your situation. We might preach one thing, but we don't think this is the absolute truth for every level project. So
Mhm.
just I guess maybe just a little acknowledgement there, like we're holding ourselves to the same standard. Like don't just do something because we said it. We'd like you to think critically about it as well.
Yeah. So I usually will listen to our podcast the day it comes out, not
Mhm.
not just because I want to inflate the listening numbers, but I just I sometimes we record these ahead of time. I sometimes forget about what's going, what we talked about. I just want to know if someone replies on Twitter what they're talking about. Just
Sure.
want to stay
Yeah.
current. I want to
Yep.
listen to, make sure it's all put together. I don't know. There's a lot of it's probably
You're
some sort
checking
of
my
vanity.
work, Aaron. That's what
Yeah,
you're
it's
doing.
it's probably some sort of vanity thing too. But what always surprises me, and I'm sure it's for everyone, is the sound that is recorded does not match the sound that's in my head for my voice.
Oh,
Like, do you
yeah.
have that where like you
Uh,
hear yourself and you're just like, is that what I sound like?
I think so. I haven't experienced that so much with the podcast, but I have a distinct memory of watching a conference talk that had the video recorded and
Mhm.
watching myself talk and gesture and pace around. I'm like, who is that goofus up there talking? And I sort of had that same kind of like disconnect experience in my mind.
Oh yeah, conference talks are the worst. I remember I've watched some where I'm like, what am I doing with my right hand all the time? Like, stop
Yep.
that. What do you
Yeah.
stop chopping at the air or whatever is going on here. But no, it's funny because I used to sing a lot. I used to make music,
Hmm.
and my singing voice sounds to me really similarly recorded that
Hmm.
it does in my head,
Okay.
but my talking voice doesn't. When I listen to my talking voice, it sounds like almost more nasal. And everyone on the podcast listening would be like, yeah, of course, dude. Like, you sound like your nose is plugged or something. I don't know, but it just doesn't sound like what it sounds super smooth in my head.
Yeah.
And then what records out is like a combination of my voice and I don't know, a duck being strangled or something. It just sounds super weird to me.
So what you're saying is stay tuned for the next all musical version of the No Compromises podcast.
That'll be great. Maybe you just want to ignore all the advice we gave you and blindly trust us.
We're happy to help. Go to masteringlaravel.io and you can check out our validation book or other resources.